Good evening. My summary presentation is on the proposed changes to the minimum wage and the potential impacts on small businesses and larger organizations. Minimum wages have been defined as the minimum amount of pay that an employer is required to give wage earners for the work they are performing during a given period, which cannot be reduced by collective agreement or an individual contract. The Fair Labor Standards Act (FLSA), enacted in 1938, is the federal legislation that sets the minimum hourly wage that must be paid to all protected workers. The minimum wage requirements of the FLSA have been changed many times since 1938, typically to expand coverage or to raise the wage rate. After its establishment, the minimum wage rate has been raised 22 separate times. The most recent change was enacted in 2007, which increased the minimum wage to its current level of $7.25 per hour. Minimum wage in America isn't as old as you might think. The first federal minimum wage was first introduced by Franklin Delano Roosevelt in 1938. The minimum wage was set at 25 cents an hour, which works out to be about $4 per hour in today's money. That minimum wage was introduced as part of the Fair Labor Standards Act. The FLSA also covers things like youth employment standards, overtime pay, record keeping, and standards for government employees at the local, state, and federal levels. The first federal minimum wage laws were passed in America in 1938, but prior to that, at least one state had passed its own minimum wage laws. Massachusetts passed minimum wage laws in 1912, although they only covered women and children. Since FDR's first federal minimum wage in 1938, the minimum wage has been raised 22 times by 12 different presidents. U.S. minimum wage is purposely set up not to rise with inflation. Minimum wage can only rise with congressional action. In other words, if the 12 presidents never raised minimum wage over the years, then we would still be getting paid a minimum of 25 cents per hour for our work. Historically, the purpose of the minimum wage has evolved from a policy tool to being used selectively in a few low-wage sectors to an instrument of much broader coverage. The research evidence of what the actual minimum wage requirements do to job numbers goes both ways. Many studies find that minimum wage laws reduce employment, and many other studies on the exact same laws find that they have little or no effect on jobs. Some 60 years and hundreds of research papers from prestigious universities, government agencies, and private organizations have created little consensus on the subject, academic or otherwise. Just last year, separate Seattle minimum wage studies by researchers at the University of Washington and the University of California, Berkeley suggested polar opposite effects. The pros are that economic stimulus raises the minimum wage, means minimum wage workers have more money to expend, which means more money ripples through the economy as minimum wage employees are able to spend more. There are more opportunities for jobs. If these minimum wage employees are spending more, then businesses are earning more and need to hire more employees to keep up with the increased sales from the minimum wage employees who are buying more. There is a reduced expense for social programs. Employees surviving at minimum wage are also often the same people who must rely on additional support of government-run social programs to support themselves and their families on such a small amount of income. Raising minimum wage means some of these people would be able to better support themselves without leaning as heavily on social programs, and this would ultimately mean lower taxes on a relocation of those funds to support other needs. There would be a decreased turnover rate. Employees who are making a higher minimum wage feel more comfortable and satisfied in their minimum wage jobs, meaning they are less likely to quit. This means that there would be a lower turnover rate, which results in fewer expenses to hire and train new employees. Inflation. The federal minimum wage needs to be raised in order to account for inflation, which raises every year, and the minimum wage has only been risen 3 times in the past 3 decades. The cons are layoffs. If an employer has a tight compensation budget and the minimum wage is raised, it means they can no longer compensate the same number of employees at the higher rate and must make layoffs to remain within budget. So while some employees may be making slightly more money, others will be left unemployed. A price increase. Employers might raise prices on their products in order to generate enough income to support their more highly paid minimum wage employees, which could ultimately create a ripple effect for those shops and industries, resulting in a slightly higher cost of living, resulting in another push to raise minimum wage again. Fewer hirings. If businesses must pay their minimum wage employees more, they cannot afford to hire as many employees. According to a Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago study, 10% increase in the minimum wage lowers low-skill employment by 2 to 4% and total restaurant employment by 1 to 3%. Or instead of hiring fewer employees, the company may start outsourcing jobs to employees in countries that are willing to work for much less than $10.10 per hour, resulting in fewer jobs for Americans. The competition will intensify. If minimum wage increases, overly qualified individuals will be vying for minimum wage positions, pushing younger, inexperienced workers out of the running and robbing them of their opportunity to gain experience and knowledge to build a resume for themselves and enter the workforce. Applied inconsistently. Many states have their own set minimum wages, which are currently above $7.25 per hour already. As of January 1st, 2014, 21 states have minimum wages above $7.15 per hour, being the highest at $9.32 per hour, Washington. So the amount the national minimum wage is set at varies in significance from state to state. The effects of minimum wage increase on employment and family income. Raising the minimum wage would increase family income for many low-wage workers, moving some of them out of poverty. But some jobs for low-wage workers would probably be eliminated, and the income of those workers would fall substantially. With most complex issues, there are consequences to raising minimum wages. Some are good, some are bad, but that extra money has to come from somewhere, right? When minimum wage rates increase, so do prices in industries like retail, restaurants, and fast food. A typical fast food place will earn anywhere from 2 to 6 cents of profit on each dollar of sales. Something has to give. So that $4 hamburger increases to $5.50. Some restaurants are simply adding a minimum wage charge at the bottom of a purchase when it's made. So in some ways, minimum wage employers will make more money. Another option to afford the increase in small businesses is to cut hours or let employees go, which can be emotionally tough on any size business. Here's what they estimate. The increments in the minimum wage from $6.75 to $7.50 in 2007 and to $8 in 2008 were estimated to increase earnings in limited service restaurants slightly more than 10%, but reduced employment by about 12%. The bump up to $10.50 by 2017 raised earnings in those restaurants by about 20%, but reduced employment by about 10%. The federal minimum wage was introduced in 1938 during the Great Depression under President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. It was initially set at 25 cents per hour and has been increased by Congress 22 times, most recently in 2009 when it went from $6.55 to $7.25 an hour. 29 states plus the District of Columbia have a minimum wage higher than the federal minimum wage. 1.8 million workers, or 2.3% of the hourly paid working population, earn the federal minimum wage or below. Proponents of a higher minimum wage state that the current federal minimum wage of $7.25 per hour is too low for anyone to live on, that a higher minimum wage will help create jobs and grow the economy, that the declining value of the minimum wage is one of the primary causes of wage inequality between low and middle income workers, and that a majority of Americans, including a slim majority of self-described conservatives, support increasing the minimum wage. Opponents say that many businesses cannot afford to pay their workers more and will be forced to close, lay off workers, or reduce hiring. That increases have been shown to make it more difficult for low-skilled workers with little or no work experience to find jobs or become upwardly mobile, and that raising the minimum wage at the federal level does not take into account regional cost of living variations where raising the minimum wage could hurt low income communities in particular.